check. Joining me on today's webinar are our panelists, David Alsop, Head of Business Development for Australia and New Zealand, and also James Matthias, Global Product Manager, Integration Partnerships. David and James bring their wealth of knowledge and experience to us today, having a combined tenure of 20 years in the aged care space. Today, David and James will be discussing the relationship between pain and dementia, why accurate pain assessment is so important, and how PainCheck and PainCheck Analytics is making a difference in enhancing clinical decision-making. Before we start today, there are a few housekeeping items which I'd like to let everybody know. Today's session will be recorded, and also we will conclude with a question and answer session. Please use the chat function within Zoom to type in your questions, and then these will be attended to at the end of today's webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dave.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy, and welcome everyone. Good morning and good afternoon from wherever you're joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen. So James or Lucy, if you mind giving me a quick nod when everything is showing on my screen. Fantastic. Well, guys, thanks once again. It's such a great turnout today, and can see some old familiar faces. So thank you for joining some new people. So welcome today, and we appreciate you making the time to join us for this this session. So PainCheck, I think it's very important to start with our why. So initially, PainCheck was originally developed to give a voice to people who cannot reliably verbalise their pain. That still stays core to our mission, but recently we've updated the tool to document the voice of people who can articulate their pain. But more importantly, we've combined and operationalised this with a tool that we're calling the PainCheck Universal Solution for people that fluctuate between the two states. So an overall pain assessment solution for everyone and everywhere. So quickly about PainCheck. So if you don't know about PainCheck, we're a very, the most commonly used clinical tool in residential aged care now across Australia. We're working with about 60% of the residential aged care market in Australia, about 1,600 facilities, but we're a broadly used medical device across different countries now. So we're working across the United Kingdom, into New Zealand as well, our friends across the ditch, and in Singapore, EU and Canada as well. You can imagine that PainCheck is got many applicability across different markets. Residential aged care has been our main focal point because of the cohort of people living with dementia that can't articulate their pain. But you can imagine it extends to home care, disability and acute hospitals where we're entering the market and working with there as well. So before we actually get into PainCheck, I really want to touch on, I suppose, the why, the challenge that we're trying to solve here for clinicians and carers across the country and across the globe. So probably not a surprise to too many people on this webinar, but chronic pain is very common, especially in residential aged care, with upwards of about 80% of consumers and residents experiencing chronic pain. People living in residential aged care now, it's becoming very much a cohort of people that do have some form of cognitive impairment, dementia. We can confidently say at least 50%, but from a recent piece of work we've done with the federal government in Australia, we've seen from about our data set about 62-ish% of residents are living with some form of cognitive impairment, and unfortunately only increasing. But on a global scale, there's 47 million people living with some form of dementia as we speak. Sadly, there's no cure for dementia at this stage, and that is growing at about 3% annually. So it's a problem, unfortunately, we don't have one, a cure for, and two, growing quite rapidly. So pain is a multidimensional issue and often goes unnoticed and untreated because simply pain is difficult to assess. But pain in someone that cannot reliably articulate or verbalize, it's profoundly difficult to assess. So a real challenge there for us carers and nurses and clinicians and people in everyday life because it's such a multidimensional process. Tools to assess pain previously have often been prone to what we call clinical subjectivity, which I'll get to later in the piece, but we've evolved on those tools and trying to make it a more subjective binary process with the inception of PainCheck in 2017. But most people in this call too would realise that the adverse impact of not assessing pain, obviously that quality of life decreases, the operational inefficiencies and compliance issues that may come from not identifying, but more importantly, managing that pain once identified as well. But on the flip side, so accurately identifying pain has many pluses, I think the most simple one, but worth mentioning, is the improved quality of life. I think all of us have suffered some sort of pain, but chronic and untreated and unmanaged pain is quite debilitating. So looking at improving quality of lives, we're looking at reducing the rates of severity of behaviours that come from undiagnosed and untreated pain, and often can be misinformed and mistreated because of the dementia that we think is driving those behaviours, but it can be pain. So we want to rule in or rule out pain to make sure we make a right treatment decision. We look at reducing those incorrectly prescribed antipsychotics or psychotropic medications, but I think a nice way of putting it is rightful medications. Those medications definitely have a place, but we're saying, hey, let's rule in or rule out pain. If it is pain, let's treat that pain first before we go down the antipsychotic route as well. So that's something that we're really passionate about here at PainCheck, around the rightful use of medications. We're looking at supporting residents that are vulnerable to infection and illness as well. Quite present, quite topical right now, obviously what we've been through the last 18 months. And we really want to enable best practice clinical care, which we can't do unless we're identifying and treating pain as well. So just quickly, team, I want to go through, I suppose, the evolution of the pain assessment tools for people living with dementia. You can see the AGS framework came out in 2002. In 2003, the PENAD was released. And then the AB pain scale, I think most people on this call would be quite familiar with. And then the inception of PainCheck in 2017. So you can see evolved quite rapidly. And then there was a huge chasm about 13 years before the inception of PainCheck. I'm quite proud to say we work quite closely with Jennifer Abbey from the Abbey Pain Scale. She's been a huge supporter of PainCheck. And we're really looking to build on her work, combining best in breed technology with best in breed process to manage a multi-dimensional issue, but more importantly, bringing pain assessment back to the point of care, which we'll get on today when my colleague James does a demonstration for you today. So looking at the research in the background, I think this is where it gets quite fascinating around the why and what we've done with PainCheck. So we're founded at Curtin University in Western Australia. We have a plethora of research papers, 5 peer published journals, but I'll kind of summarize some key points for the sake of everyone's time today. Is that one, people living with some form of dementia express pain in a more heightened manner on their face as opposed to your eye. The reason being is they've lost what we call learnt behaviours. So for example, if I kick my shin in a meeting right now, I can put on a brave stoic face, keep presenting and pretend it didn't happen. Unfortunately, our friends with dementia, they don't have the cognition to fake it. So the face becomes a really good insight into that. Secondly, the face is plastic. So male, female, race, gender, it doesn't matter. We all the same micro muscle movements in our face that's indicative of human emotion. Keyword being indicative, because like I said, pain is multi-dimensional, multi-pronged as well. On that point too, we identified through the research that it is just not about the face. The face is a great place to start, but to do a proper pain assessment end-to-end, it's a multi-dimensional process that needs to look at the face, the voice, movement, behavior, and the body to get an overall accurate pain assessment. And finally, that research showed that previous pain tools, like the PainAD and Abbey Pain Scale, were very much prone to what we call clinical subjectivity. So I'm a physiotherapist by background. I may assess my colleague James, and I can see James is guarding his right shoulder, and that may be, in my clinical opinion, severe. But in someone else's clinical opinion, that may be moderate, maybe mild. So it wasn't a consistent framework for every clinician to pick up and put down to go through a pain assessment process to have an accurate baseline of pain. So that's a bit of background on the research team before we get to PainCheck. But I might touch on this slide just quickly here around innate human behaviors expressed with facial movement. So we can see the brain has a reaction with 20 to 40 microseconds. There's 43 facial muscles, and there's 68 or 178 points on the face that we can check that will identify certain human emotions. None of these human emotions are tracked by what we call the facial action coding system. So the FACS for short is action unit codes that derive human emotion from micromuscle movement in the face. Nine of those micromuscle movements are indicative of pain, as you can see here with a combination of different muscle movements here. But the challenge with the facial action coding unit is, one, if done subjectively, it is prone to clinical subjectivity. So I think Dave's brow lowering, but is that how Dave just looks? It's really difficult to assess, and it's quite time consuming and a very laborious process to go through. But 9 of those micromuscle movements in the face are indicative of pain. So the why behind PainCheck and what we've done. So PainCheck is a medical device in the form of an app. We use smartphone and smart device hardware to use the tool itself. You can use the camera of the phone to perform the artificial intelligence side of our tool. So what we've done is we've actually streamlined the process of assessing the face through artificial intelligence and machine learning. The reason being so is that one, the face is readily available, so very accessible, but two, probably the most subjective part of the assessment process going, is Dave's face always got that slight grimace across his forehead, or is he in pain? So we thought, how do we rule out this subjectiveness and take artificial intelligence, modern day technology, to streamline a process for a clinician to aid them in doing a better job for assessing pain and having better clinical interventions. In addition to this, as I mentioned previously, we use a 6-domain multi-pronged, multi-dimensional process. We're really looking at using artificial intelligence and intelligent automation to get a really good overall pain assessment and pain score and pain outcome, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. So team, as I just said before, we really look at combining those key elements, going artificial intelligence into intelligent automation. And what we've done is then started with the face and then gone into those other domains you can see there on the right-hand side, like the movement, the voice, the body, etc. And what we've done here is automated this process to make it a binary checklist, taking away that clinical subjectivity for a clinician to observe a resident at the point of care to see if an indicative pain cue is present or not present. That will give you an overall pain score and pain severity. So there's 42 different checkpoints in pain check. A resident will be calibrated into a category of no pain, mild, moderate, or severe. And then obviously that severity would then lead to some sort of intervention, which we'll touch on in a few minutes as well. We have pain trending as well, but we do integrate into clinical care management systems, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. We're agnostic when it comes to that. But I think if we're going to summarize the key 3 clinical outcomes today, team, that we're looking to drive, is that 1, help carers identify the presence of pain when it isn't obvious. So a clinician may be looking at a resident going, I'm not sure if it's the dementia driving these behaviors. Is it pain? Is it a combination of both? And it's just as important to rule out pain as it is to rule in pain. So really trying to give another string to a clinician's bow to help them observe and identify pain when it's not obvious. Secondly, it will qualify and quantify the severity of that pain. And like I said previously, into a category of no pain, mild, moderate, or severe. And something I love dearly is the monitoring and the effectiveness of intervention. So fantastic. We've identified pain when it's not obvious. It is severe, for example. What's our next step? When we can track someone's pain journey to see how effective our interventions are in regards to assessing and reassessing pain post-intervention. That may be pharmaceutical, it may be therapy, it may be a combination of both, but really reassessing to see how effective interventions are and to make sure someone's pain is heading down in that right direction. So team, I touched on earlier about how we've incorporated the numeric rating scale into pain check, which we're calling the universal pain check solution. So we're conscious that pain check is used by a lot of our clients across the country and across different continents and countries, but we got consistent feedback that they wanted one single source of pain assessment solution in one tool. So what we did is incorporate a digitized numeric rating scale. So for those who don't know, the numeric rating scale is a validated tool to assess pain in people who can articulate their pain. So we're capturing the voice of people who can articulate their pain as well as the people that can't through the traditional pain check tool, which I've spoken about before. The idea here is that we're conscious that a lot of residents can fluctuate in that early mild dementia state from saying, having a conversation and speaking like I am today, and you're trusting as a clinician that they can self-report. But unfortunately, the next day, that dementia may have kicked in and you don't believe they can self-assess. So the idea is that pain check is a single source solution to assess all residents across any state of their journey regarding being completely cognitively intact or unfortunately having some form of cognitive impairment through dementia. The great thing is that it's a centralized depository for all your pain assessments and pain analytics, which James will touch on today. So it's a single source solution for all pain assessments for all your residents across your facilities. So some key benefits, team, which I'll touch on quickly before I hand over to James and to take you through the tool itself, is that we're automating a process. So we're obviously looking at the increased objectivity and staff losing an automated process and a consistent process. We're empowering your staff by looking at a completely objective process. So we're looking at a really accurate way to assess pain. We're reducing time. So I'm very passionate about giving clinical time back to clinical people. We take about 2 minutes once someone's trained on to do an assessment at the point of care using pain check, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. That generally documents straight into your clinical system which I'll touch on in a few slides, like I said. But we're looking at improving a consistent process to really bridge the gap between clinicians, say RNs to GPs, to have a medical device sitting by their side to assist them, to help them make better clinically informed decisions. And like I said, we document this all into our cloud and integrate to third-party clinical systems, which I'll touch on just now. So there's some of the key benefits. In addition to that, we are an evidence-based, obviously being a medical device, for funding tools like the NAC coming in and ACFI, and also obviously a resident that's living pain-free is one of the key standards of the quality standards for residents living their best life, which would be pain-free. So just quick on the integration piece, like I said, we are completely agnostic when it comes to integration. We integrate our software into third-party clinical systems our clients use. And that's a two-way integration. So what we're doing is pulling resident information into PainCheck, then pushing pain assessments back into the clinical system in real time. As you can see, here's an example of some of the clinical systems you integrate with in different markets, Australia having the majority of those clinical systems, but across the UK, Canada, and New Zealand as well. And the idea as team is that we're not duplicating effort, we're not double handling your data, and we're not going through any risk of human error. So really focusing on point of care assessment, press save, completely documented back into your clinical system. And like we like to position ourselves as part of your clinical ecosystem. So PainCheck sits in that broader clinical ecosystem. If you are still using paper-based and you're not using a clinical electronic medication management or clinical system, we do our own backends to support that, which James will take it through as well. So point of care assessment, no duplication of effort or double entry of data, completely integrated into your clinical suite. So I think after that, I might just hand over to James. You've heard about the background, the context and the why, but more importantly, let's see how it works. So James, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to you for a demonstration.
Thank you so much, David. And I will get you to leave your camera on because you're going to be part of our demonstration in just a moment, if you don't mind.
Fantastic.
So, thank you again so much, everyone, for joining. So what I'm going to be taking you through now is, as Dave said, a demonstration of the PainCheck tool. As we go through the tool, we're going to be talking about the different components, how they relate to understanding pain in someone who is living with dementia, another form of cognitive impairment, and of course, looking at the NRS there as well for those who can reliably self-report their pain. I'm going to begin sharing my screen now. And once again, David, if you could do me a favor and just give me a nod when you can see my mobile phone on screen, please. Great, thank you very much. So here we go. So where we're looking at now is the login screen of the PainCheck application. I wanted to bring you in from the login screen just to show you really quickly. In general, we would get your staff, your team signing in via a username and password. But before we get into anything more nitty-gritty, just talking about a nice little quality of life feature there. From the login screen, we can integrate our logins with your other systems through a single sign-in. So you can have exactly the same login for your other systems as for PainCheck, if that's all set up. But outside of that, we also have a quick sign-in option. So when you first go to sign in to PainCheck, you'll be able to set up a 4-digit PIN. And once you've set that up, all you've got to do is tap on your name, enter your PIN, and you'll be taken straight into the PainCheck application. I'm using an iPhone here today, but PainCheck is compatible across iPhones, iPads, Android phones, or Android tablets. We're not too fussy about the device as long as it meets our quite generous minimum standards. So I'm on the dashboard of the PainCheck application now. The first thing you'll notice is, well, I've got a lot of little dots with people's faces and names there. And these are my residents who I can go and conduct assessments on. Up top, you've got a gentleman named David Stone. He's in my favorites. He's my resident. And I've manually configured that, someone who I might need to assess on a really regular basis. Below that, we can see people who have been recently assessed in the system. You can see quite a few names there in our demo system, but really does what it says on the tin, going back to people who you've assessed recently. Before we jump into looking at a particular resident and looking at that assessment process, I'm just going to tap on that residents button down in the bottom middle of the screen. So here we can see a full list of all of the different residents in the system. We can also use a search function here to find the person who we want to assess. With integration, as David mentioned earlier, we can draw all of your resident details directly from your main clinical system. So instead of having to worry about, well, double entry, all the admin that comes with, the admin just gets done for you automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and select David here. It's going to be easy on names today. So we can see when I tap on David, I get taken to what we refer to as a resident dashboard. From the resident dashboard, I can see all of David's key identifying information up top. Obviously, a picture of the person. I can see his name, his date of birth, his age. And if we had the detail, I'd also be able to see things like his room number, what wing of my facility that he lived in, a nickname if he's got one, all those key pieces of identifying information. Below that, we can also see David's recent pain assessments. Now, before we review those recent pain assessments, let's actually begin conducting an assessment. So you'll see that big green button down the bottom of the screen that simply says assess pain. And I'm going to go ahead and tap on that. The first thing that we get asked when we begin a pain assessment is, well, what type of assessment do we want to conduct today? So we can see we have two options. Are we going to use a numerical rating scale for someone who can reliably self-report their pain at the time of assessment? Or are we going to use the pain check pain assessment? That's our observational assessment supported by that AI system, which is for people who are unable to reliably self-report their pain, again, at the time of assessment. People often, as David highlighted earlier, fluctuate in cognitive state, whether that's due to the progression of an underlying condition, due to a short-term condition like the cognitive impacts of a UTI, for example, could be associated with medication. Whatever the case may be, as we flag on screen, it's always best practice to interact with that resident up front. Ask them how they're doing, because if they are able to self-report at that point in time, well, we want to take their self-report. That's our gold standard. In that case, we would select the numerical rating scale. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, you selected NRS because David was able to reliably report their pain when asked. On the flip side, if someone cannot reliably self-report their pain in our clinical judgment, we'll select that pain check pain assessment. That's what we'll start with today. So I'm going to press next now, and we get a couple more options as we begin our assessment. So the first question we get there is, what is the timing of the assessment? Is the assessment being performed while your resident is at rest, or is it being performed immediately post-movement? To explain these a little bit more, an at-rest assessment where someone is sitting down, lying down, they're in a comfort position. When someone's in that situation, typically, if they're able, they'll position their body so that they're experiencing a minimum of pain. Just like any of us, if I'm uncomfy in my chair, I'll shift my body around until I am comfortable, and that's where I'll happily sit. So that's typically a minimum of pain that we see. If someone is experiencing at-rest pain, there may be a suggestion that that pain is chronic and they are unable to escape that pain. And that can have some pretty broad-reaching impacts on someone's quality of life. On the flip side, we have post-movement assessments. So this is where someone has independently been moving around or with assistance has been moved or repositioned. Movement is typically, we're moving the limbs, muscles are working, joints are moving. Typically, that's going to trigger those peaks of pain. So if someone has been moving around, they're likely to be at the higher level of pain, the higher end of the pain that they're experiencing day to day. So what we're really capturing is the chronic pain that someone may be unable to escape with the at-rest assessment versus the peak of pain that someone might be experiencing in a post-movement assessment. So that's a pretty unique data point for pain check, and it does tie deeply into how we can report on someone's experience. We'll look at that later on. For now, we'll select a post-movement assessment. Below that, we then have a question about facial analysis. So we've got our two options here. A video facial analysis is actually using the AI tool in PainCheck. So we can do that in a second, using the camera in the device to look at your resident's face and identify if any of those different micro expressions that are indicative of pain are present or not. If they are, it's a great start to our assessment. Not the whole thing, but a set of really strong and valuable indicators there. So as David mentioned, we have the AI tool there to support that process and make sure that that facial analysis is quick, easy, and straightforward for anyone working as part of your team. There's also a manual option there because there are always going to be times where the camera is unable to see your resident's face. It could be as simple as, you're doing an assessment at 11 o'clock at night, and you know that if you switch the lights on, well, you're going to disturb that person, but your eyes can still see the person to assess what's going on. Could be that someone's moving around very much and you can't angle the camera appropriately. But overall, it's a fallback option to make sure there's never a situation in which you're unable to use that component of a pain check pain assessment. I'll also highlight here that in the absence of facial expressions, so quite commonly in residential aged care and other caring industries, people may suffer from or may live with full or partial facial paralyses caused by things like Parkinsonian conditions. So in the absence of that face domain, PainCheck is still a validated pain assessment tool. So if someone does have a full or partial facial paralysis, we can still use the tool and get an accurate and reliable measure of how much pain they're in. So we're going to begin a video facial analysis now. And I'm afraid from a tech perspective, David, you are very, very small on my little screen here. So I may have to try to give a demo on myself, but let's give it a go now and see what we can do. Will the system pick up David's face?
Coming close for you, James.
Thank you very much. And it looks like it might have you there, Dave. So we've got the resident. Dave, I'll get you to be in pain for me, and we'll try for a 3-second facial analysis. Perfect. I love that the system was resilient, even quite far away from the camera. We were still able to pick you up. And that speaks to real world application. You can be standing quite a couple of meters back from your resident and still assess their face. You don't need to be up close and personal. So we can see what happened there. We opened the camera, we found the resident's face, we conducted a 3-second facial analysis, and the system then identified the micro expressions that were being displayed and which are indicative of pain. In this case, we can see cheek raising, tightening of eyelids, and raising of the upper lip. If we tap on any of these, we can see a little information bubble there to give us a detailed definition of specifically what the system is looking for and what we would be looking for were it a manual facial analysis. So that's our face domain. It's the first part of the assessment, but it's only one component. So let's think about a little bit of a scenario for today. We're assessing David Stone, not David Alsop. Let's say David is a new resident in our residential aged care facility. Let's say he's got moderate dementia, some significant mobility issues. Let's say he's been having lunch, and we've just walked him back to his bedroom. He uses a 4-wheel walker. David's pretty confused today, and that's why we've chosen to use the PainCheck pain assessment. Let's say David, we get him back to his room, and he's going to sit down in his chair, and we start noticing, you know what? I think he might be experiencing some pain. He's showing some signs and indicators. I'm going to conduct a pain assessment. So we've done our facial analysis. David sat down, we've done our facial analysis. We're now going to move through our other 5 domains to get that rounded picture and capture that multi-dimensional view of the individual. So we swipe across, and it's just swipe left to right, or right to left rather, and we get taken to the voice domain. Now we're looking at different potential vocalizations that could be indicative of pain. We won't go through all of our different indicators in detail, just due to the nature of our session today, but please do feel free to get in touch, have a chat, take a look on our website, and you can see much more detail. So as we move through, we can see our different indicators. So noisy pain sounds, for example, if I tap on that indicator, sounds or utterances related to pain, e.g. ouch, consider this at the time of assessment. So, David was sitting down in his chair, he's positioned his walker and he's beginning to sit down. I reckon we could hear some ooh as he went to sit down. So we just tap on that toggle and select that. So in the facial analysis, the system did it for us, but now we're using our clinical judgment to identify which of those indicators are present. I will also just flag at this point that all we're answering about for any of our indicators is yes or no. That's one thing with particularly identification of pain in people with cognitive impairments, with dementia, who can't reliably self-report. Like David mentioned earlier, what I think is severe might be what you think is moderate or mild. What I think is a very frequent display of an indicator of pain, you might think is intermittent at best, because we all have our own background, our own subjective bias, really. But with the pain check assessment, we're just giving a yes or a no answer. So it's much more likely that you and I will have exactly the same response. And as you can see on the studies on the pain check website, this leads to an improvement in what's referred to as inter-rater reliability. What I assess and what you assess are much more likely to be very, very close. So we know that when we're assessing pain, it's objective and it's consistent. Back to the voice domain. We can see some other items here, like repeatedly requesting help, groaning, moaning. And I reckon as David was sitting down, moving to position, I think we could hear some moaning from him as well. Crying, screaming, loud talk, howling, sighing. And I think as he sat down, we heard a big, so we can select that item as well. We've now finished our voice domain, and we're going to swipe across. Whoops, let's select moaning again. We'll swipe across to the movement domain. So here we're looking at how your resident is moving, what's happening with their movements. So we can see some indicators here like altered or random leg or arm movements. And again, we can see our detailed definitions for all of these indicators here. We can see things like restlessness, freezing, that's like freezing up, guarding or touching a body part. You know what? This one extremely common. So if someone is sort of feeling sore, well, you just naturally put your hand, you might massage or touch on that body part. So I reckon as David sat down, he's put his hand on his hip. I think that might be where that pain was coming from. So let's select that guarding or touching a body part. Below that, we can also see abnormal sitting, standing, walking. I reckon we've seen this one as well. When he's sitting in his chair, he's leaning over and touching that hip. He's slanted, tilted over, slumped in the chair. We'll select that abnormal sitting, standing, walking. Finally, I'll just highlight pacing and wandering here. I don't know about all of you all, but for me, in every memory support unit that I've ever worked in, every facility that I've worked in more generally, pacing and wandering is an exceptionally common thing to see. There are often people who are consistently pacing and wandering. And often behaviors that are so common and so frequent can be normalized. And this is a really big challenge in identifying pain, because what we see every day becomes normal. It stops being an indicator of pain and starts just being a standard. So pain check does, in that sense, prompt you to consider behaviors that may seem normal or common, but really they are indicators of pain, and it makes sure that those contribute to our overall assessment. I don't think David's doing that, so we won't select that one today. We're going to swipe through now to the behavior domain. So here we can see factors around a resident's behavior. So we can see things like introversion, aggression. I mentioned earlier that David is quite confused today, so we'll just check that. Unclear in thinking or understanding, unable to follow instructions, repetitive questioning. That sounds like what David's been doing for us, so we're going to select confused there. However, looking at my other indicators here, I don't think any of these are applicable today. So we'll swipe through again to the resident's activity. Here we're thinking about not just today, but that person's recent history. So we can see things like, has our resident been resisting care? So unable to cooperate, become compliant, refusing to receive care, e.g. food or medicine, over the last 7 days. You know what? I think we had a great deal of difficulty getting David to eat his lunch just a minute ago, so I'm going to select that resisting care. We can also see things here like prolonged resting, changing sleep cycles, altered routines. But again, all of these, we can see our definitions and the time frame we need to consider them over. We can also make notes. So down the bottom here, for any of our domains, we have this additional remarks section. So I'm going to enter in here, David, David Alsop, there you are. David did not want to eat, required encouragement. So just a little note there, and we can add that straight in for our reference when we look back at this assessment at this point in time. We'll now swipe through to our very last domain, the body domain. So these are some broader clinical indicators that we might be thinking about. Things like, is the person profusely sweating? That's sweating inappropriate for the temperature or time of day. I don't think that was David. Is he pale or flushed? I don't think so. Feverish or cold? Not that I could see today. Was he breathing rapidly? No, I don't think he had a fast rate of breathing. Does he have any painful injuries? So this is a really broad and again, a really common indicator for us to consider. So there's painful injuries. And this could be anything from a fall, a pressure area, a wound. You know what? We know that David did have a fall relatively recently. Actually, that might be impacting that hip that we noticed he was holding on to earlier. So let's select those painful injuries. Then lucky last, painful medical conditions. So this one is one of the most commonly found indicators, and it impacts the majority of people living in a residential aged care setting. Simply by nature of requiring residential care, you're likely to have those comorbidities, things like, or those other conditions rather, things like osteoarthritis and osteoporosis are extremely common, but there are a wide range of different potential painful medical conditions that may impact. So we just want to think about, does this person have any painful medical conditions? And we'll go ahead and select that for David, because let's say he's got potentially some osteoarthritis there. We've now completed all of our domains. So we've got that multi-dimensional view. So the system has helped us, that AI has supported us with the facial analysis, but we've used our clinical judgment and our knowledge of that resident to complete the remainder of this wide-ranging multi-dimensional assessment. And we're going to go ahead and click on Display Summary down the bottom of the screen. And here we can see now the overview of that assessment, what we scored in each domain, and down the bottom, our overall pain score and pain rating. And this is the key piece of information for us as clinicians to decide what intervention is going to be appropriate, if any. Here we can see that David scored a 12. Our pain check scale is from 0 to 42. That's just the nature of the assessment. We needed to keep it broad, so there are a lot of different indicators in there. But the key piece of information then is that conversion to a rating of no pain, mild, moderate, or severe pain. And you don't need to remember the conversion because every single place that we show the outcome, we always show that word. And in this case, David has moderate pain. So moderate pain is a significant event, and we are going to go and put an appropriate intervention in place, whether that's a heat pack, a massage, TENS treatment, or if it's a pharmacological intervention, we're going to use our judgment to determine that. But for now, we're just going to hit save. So by saving this assessment, we're locking it from any further editing. We're adding it to David's pain record and pain chart. We're pushing it through to the back end of the pain check system. And where integration is present, we're sending that straight into your pain check chart in your care management system. So I'll go ahead and save that now, and we can see that's been added to David's pain record here. So very quickly, we're also going to conduct an NRS assessment before we take a look at that reporting and backend. So David, he's not able to reliably self-report today, but we go down the hall, we're going to conduct an assessment. Let's, who have we got here? We've got Joe. So Joe goes by Jolly. We need to suss out how Joe is feeling today. Joe's just in a lounge area watching some telly, but he's up for a regular reassessment. Maybe he's resident of the day. We want to go and check in on him. So we click on our assess pain option there. And we ask him how he's doing. And he's pretty switched on. He's having a chat, tells us he's feeling pretty good. So we're going to select that numerical rating scale and press next. So just like before, we're going to select an assessment timing. So Jolly's just sitting on the sofa in the lounge area watching some TV. He's at rest. He's not been up and about. So we'll select that at rest assessment timing. Then we've got a question to ask. This is a specifically worded question. So, Jolly, can you rate your pain on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is no pain and 10 is the worst pain imaginable? It's pretty standard. We're all familiar, I'm sure, with the numerical rating scale. So he can give us a response. He's feeling pretty good today, but he's got a little bit of a twinge in his neck. Maybe he slept a bit badly last night. He tells us his pain's a 2 out of 10. So we can go ahead and select that 2 on our slider there. And once again, you can see that number is converted across into a rating. In this case, just a rating of mild pain there. Just to show you, if we select some different options, you can see how that could be moderate, could be severe, or of course could be no pain. But we'll select our 2 today. And if we want to, we can also document body location. So Jolly mentioned that it was his neck that was playing up a little bit. He thought he had slept wrong. So we can go ahead and document in our body location field here. So let's say left side neck. And if someone has recurring pain and they've told us what body location that that pain was occurring in previously, and we enter it into the system here, PainCheck's going to remember that. So next time when we type the letter N, it'll pop up neck, that sort of thing. So we'll go ahead and hit save. Once again, that's been added to the pain record here, and of course sent through to our backend and to any integrated clinical systems. Before we look at that backend and those integrated systems, just a couple last things in the PainCheck app to show you. We can also take a look at pain charting. So by tapping on pain chart here, we can see the last 7 days of assessments, in this case for Joe, for Jolly. We can see his NRS assessments and his PainCheck pain assessments. So we can see actually he was in some pretty severe pain observationally over the past week or so. We used a PainCheck assessment there, and that suggests that there was some change in his cognitive state. And if you were in pain that severe, I can definitely see how your cognitive state would be impacted. And that's come down recently, and we've been able to speak to him directly. So we can see when we assessed him earlier this week, he was able to self-report that he was in moderate pain. And now today, that's come down to just some mild pain. So it looks like he's made a big improvement over the last couple of weeks, which is, great to see you. We're a real person. It would be great to see. So this is our pain charting in the PainCheck app. And we're in just a second going to look at that pain charting in the PainCheck portal, or the back end of our system. Oops. So Daisy. But before we do that, I'll just show you very quickly, coming back, I've just pressed back to bring us back to the home page, the dashboard in PainCheck. If you have any questions while you're using the tool, you need more information, or you're not sure about anything, there is just that support button right there on the dashboard. If you tap on that, you'll get a pop-up and you can get onto our online user guide. You can get in touch with us via email, or you can give us a call. Any of those options, we hope will be able to solve any problems or answer any questions you might have. And that's available to you, just all as part of use of the PainCheck tool. But I'm eating up our time today, so I'm going to just jump over and stop showing you my phone and begin showing you the back end, and where you can learn more about what's going on with your residents and what your team are doing in terms of pain assessment activity. So in just a second, you'll be able to see the login screen of the PainCheck portal. And I access this via the PainCheck website. So I'm going to go ahead and just sign into my profile here. And it's just the same login that you use for the PainCheck app. And you'll be taken into the PainCheck portal. We won't spend too long taking a look at the portal today, but just to give you a bit of a flavor of it. The first place that we get taken is the PainCheck dashboard. And you can see that that's now loading in our real-time reporting about what's going on in my facility. We can look across different time scales. Right now, we're looking over the last 12 months. We can look at individual facilities, or we can look at individual residents. So we can see things like the level of pain experienced, how many residents are being assessed, how many assessments are being conducted, trends in follow-up for assessment of residents who are being assessed, average pain scores, both observed and self-reported. So a wide variety of detailed real-time metrics across a whole organization, a facility, or of course, for a resident. Why don't we take a look at Joe at Jolly, who we assessed just a second ago. So if I select him, the system will just take a second to refresh, and we'll be able to see his specific assessment history. Now, how many assessments have been done with him? When did they occur? What was his pain trend looking like, both observed and self-reported? We can even see things like what are the most common indicators of pain for him as an individual. So if we were putting together a care plan and wanted to know, well, what should we look out for with Joe? Well, we can say that if Joe is restless, that appears commonly when he experiences pain. If we see restlessness, let's do an assessment. Or if he becomes aggressive, for example, or he won't get out of bed, prolonged resting. So all of these little data points can tie in to allow us to better understand what someone who is living with dementia is experiencing and what they display when they experience pain to help us craft our care plans. We can also look, I'll just very quickly show you, we can also look at individual residents. So let's just look at David here, who we assessed first up. I've just typed in his name, and we can see he's appeared here. If I click on him, I can see all of his assessments, and we can actually already see the assessment that we did just a moment ago. If I click on that, I can see all of the indicators. I can see the comment I made about him not wanting to have lunch. And of course, all of these, whether it's a single assessment or a whole pain chart, these are all printable. So these can go straight onto paper to take to your handover meetings, resident of the day, anything like that. Now, we've only got about 10 minutes left, and I've taken more than my fair share of time today. So I'm going to very quickly show you as well some of our other reporting. So this isn't just an example of some month-to-month reporting that PainCheck can provide, just to show you how we can make use of that data. So we can look at trends, how you're performing month to month around various key performance indicators that are associated with your, the standards you need to maintain from an accreditation perspective and just from a best practice pain management perspective. We can see trends in usage, key analytics there. We can see leaderboards across multiple facilities, across all of those key metrics. I really love this one. We can look at follow-up as a key performance indicator. This is about, are our staff actually following up when someone has pain? Are they documenting and demonstrating that that pain has been resolved? And how does that change over time? And how does pain level change? So here we can almost track the effectiveness of our interventions. If someone has pain, how is that changing on subsequent assessment? Are we effectively resolving pain first time, or is it taking us multiple interventions to resolve pain in some scenarios? So like I say, we've got detailed reporting that's available, taking that data end to end from that multi-dimensional assessment conducted in the PainCheck app, moving right through to how effective are my team day to day in their interventions. That's everything from me today. So I will just say thank you very, very much for your time on me. Hopefully we've been able to cover off how to use the PainCheck tool, but moreover, how the PainCheck tool allows us insight into the lives and experiences of those people under our care who are living with dementia. Okay. So
that's back to you, Lucy. Sorry.
Thanks, Luce.
Yeah, thank you so much, David and James, for that great detailed presentation, as well as that demonstration. That was really thorough. And I hope that everybody also gained some benefits and learnt a lot from having a look at how PainCheck works in real time, as well as the integration with the clinical management system. I just wanted to advise that if anybody did have any questions, please enter them into the chat screen, and David and James will respond to those. If you have come through, Dave and James, I'll just read those out if you don't mind. Thank you. So the first one is, how does my data get from PainCheck to my clinical system? And in this case, the person uses Telstra Health. So if you can please advise, that would be great.
Absolutely, I might jump in on that one. Thanks, Lucy. So the way that integration with those clinical systems like Telstra Health works, effectively, when you conduct a pain assessment using the PainCheck app, that assessment gets pushed into the PainCheck database. So when you're connected to the internet, that happens right away. If your phone isn't connected to the internet, it'll happen, or your smart device isn't connected to the internet, it'll sync up the next time it is connected. So you don't need to be online to do a PainCheck assessment. But once it is connected, it'll go up into the PainCheck database. The PainCheck database basically says, great, I've got a new assessment, and we'll push that across into your clinical management system in the cloud. So that can be configured in a variety of different ways, depending on what system you're using, but that's something that our IT team would support you with. But effectively, it happens in the cloud via an encrypted link between those two systems. So it'll get pushed across as soon as possible after that assessment has been completed. And it happens in the opposite way as well. If you update your residents in your clinical system, it'll get pushed right across back into PainCheck as well.
Thank you so much, James. Another question that has come through is, what are the benefits and outcomes that I can see after implementing PainCheck?
Right, I might jump on this one, James. I think, team, some of the consistent things we've seen since we've implemented PainCheck across the country is that, across Australia, not neglecting our New Zealand friends on the call, is that we really have seen a reduction in psychotropic or rightful medications. So we're about to do a case study around the reduction of psychotropic medications, but I like to call it rightful medication. So if it is pain, treating that pain with the right medication for that pain. If it's not, that's really important to rule out pain as well. We can use those psychotropics to manage those behaviours driven by that dementia. Secondly, I really like, and we have seen this a lot across PainCheck, is how we break down the clinical hierarchy we sometimes see in aged care. So facilitating a conversation from carer to registered nurse to, say, allied health to GP, say, hey, this is a medical device, it's supporting my clinical decision-making, and this is what we should do. So really supporting those clinical decision-making points. And really importantly, I think I've seen in my tenure in aged care over the last 13 years, clinical people now have become so bogged down in administration. So ACFI, ANAC, Royal Commissions, new accreditation standards. So we're really passionate about giving clinical people back that clinical time. So point of care assessment, press save, straight to our cloud, integrate into your clinical system. So I'm really passionate about getting our clinicians back to being clinically focused and not bogged down in administration. So there's probably three of the key outcomes we've seen consistently across the use of PainCheck across Australia and New Zealand.
Great. Do we have any other questions there, Luce?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dave. There is a question as well about the subscription of PainCheck. So if you wouldn't mind going into a little bit of detail on how a PainCheck subscription works.
Of course, I'm happy to jump on this one too. So it's a very simple subscription team. So we don't cap usage, we don't cap users. We really want to encourage for anyone to assess when they want to assess, how often they want to assess. So those right behaviours around PainCheck. It's purely just based on a per resident or per how many beds in a facility subscription, but it is an all-inclusive subscription. So access to our clinical experts, registered nurses or pharmacists for training and education, ongoing training webinars. We've got our own e-learning modules that can be embedded into your learning management system on the SCORM package. Like I said, unlimited use of the PainCheck tool, and more importantly, inclusive that integration as well. So that's what we kind of include. It's an all-inclusive subscription for a very simple fee, which I can give some more details offline if anyone wants any further details.
That's great. Thank you for that, Dave. The last question that has come through is in regards to, or with regards to rather, clinical studies. One of our attendees has asked if they're able to see clinical studies previously undertaken by PainCheck and where they'd be able to access that.
Yeah,
James, want to jump on that one?
absolutely. Yeah, sure thing. So all of those clinical studies are available directly on the PainCheck website. So if you want to see the science that underpins the tool, we are proud to sort of tout that front and center. So if you jump on the PainCheck website, I believe there is a section called resources, and there is a subsection there called clinical studies. Lucy, while I'm talking, I've just seen another question pop through just with regards to the numerical rating scale feature. The question being, if you're using PainCheck currently and don't have it, do we recommend that you use it? So just to answer that, and I believe that's from Suilin at OLC Care. Thank you so much for the question there. So in that scenario, we do generally recommend that PainCheck Universal allows for utility across all of your residents. So if someone is able to reliably self-report, well, your clinical process is identical between using the PainCheck observational tool and documenting their self-reported pain. So in terms of what your team need to do when pain is encountered, it makes sure that they need to do exactly the same thing, and there's no confusion there. Beyond that, the big benefit that it grants is all of the analytics that PainCheck can generate and provide. Being able to say, these are the trends in activity across all of your residents, across what all of your team are doing in all scenarios, regardless of the cognitive state of your residents, means that all of that data it's broadly applicable. And you can, whether it's following up with your team to make sure that they are adhering to process and conducting all of the assessments they need to, regardless of someone's cognitive state, whether it's seeing pain trends across the whole facility or whole organization, there are some potential significant benefits that you can see there. Of course, everyone's situation is different. So we'd recommend that you do have a chat with your PainCheck account manager, and they can provide you with some detailed information about, of course, the PainCheck Universal tool is available at no additional cost for any existing PainCheck users, or anyone who's not using it's part of our overall subscription. So it's not an extra item to tag on in that sense. But let's have a chat. I would encourage you to reach out to your PainCheck account manager. I'll sort of touch base with them offline as well, and we can have that conversation. If it is most appropriate, we can absolutely make that happen for you.
Thank you so much, James. Another question has come through. What happens to the patient data once they're discharged from a facility?
Absolutely. Jump on that, James.
Absolutely. So if a resident is discharged from a facility, that data will continue to live within PainCheck. Obviously, from a records keeping perspective, you do need to hold on to that information for a quite extended period of time. Once that person has departed, either passed away or moved to live elsewhere, moved to hospital, anything like that. That resident, where integration is present, if you depart that resident in your main clinical management system, that'll get updated in general in PainCheck as well. And that resident will move to an archived status. So they're no longer available to have new assessments conducted, but the information is maintained there. So that'll continue to live in the system until such a time as you choose to download that information, or you can request that we remove it if that record keeping minimum period has elapsed and you make that decision for some reason. But in general, we hold all of that information securely in that archived state ongoing to make sure that you never lose any required records with regards to someone's clinical assessment.
Thank you so much. If there are any other questions, please do type them into the chat box. But I'd like to let everybody know that without anything at the moment, I would like to conclude today's session. First and foremost, thank you everybody for taking time out of your morning to join us, and to Dave and James once again for taking us through what was a really detailed and thorough overview of PainCheck. I would also like to let all the attendees know that you'll be receiving a follow-up email in the next day containing a copy of the webinar, both presentation and recording. Additionally, you will also receive the white paper, Common Challenges for Care Managers. Moving on from that, we'll send you an email within the next few weeks on further webinars that we will be conducting late November and early December. These webinars will be focusing on clinical and research aspects. So I hope that everybody did enjoy today's webinar. Nothing else has come through. So please, everyone, take care, stay safe, and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
So much,
appreciate your time.
See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.